Racist female bank manager declines black man's check, not realizing he owns the bank. "Mr. Carter," the woman said, her voice thick with condescension, as she pushed the check back across the polished desk. Her perfectly manicured fingers lingered on the paper like it offended her. "I'm sorry, but we can't cash this for you. This bank has a policy of verifying such large sums." Her words dripped with an undertone he couldn't miss, but it wasn't her words that stunned the most. It was the look in her eyes. John Carter stood frozen for a moment, the weight of her disdain sinking in. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and a calm demeanor, but even his patience was tested. "Policy. This check is legitimate," he said, his tone steady but firm. "Call the number on it. The funds are there." The bank manager, Ms. Evelyn Harper, didn't even glance at the check again. Instead, she straightened her blazer and smirked. "I don't need to call anyone. I can spot a forgery when I see one." The room went silent as a few customers glanced over, sensing the tension. John clenched his jaw, his dark eyes narrowing. "Do you know who owns this bank?" he asked, his voice low and measured. Evelyn raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Yes, Mr. Carter, I do. And I'm sure they wouldn't appreciate someone like you trying to pull a stunt like this." The corners of John's lips curved into a small, almost imperceptible smile. It wasn't the reaction Evelyn expected, and for the first time she seemed slightly unsettled. He leaned in, his voice calm but laced with authority. "I'd own this bank." Evelyn's smirk faltered. For a second, she looked as though she'd misheard him. Her confident expression crumbled, replaced by confusion and disbelief, and finally, the faintest hint of fear. The door to her office swung open, and an assistant poked her head in. "Miss Harper, Mr. Williams from headquarters is on the line. He says it's urgent." Evelyn blinked, her composure slipping further. She looked back at John, suddenly unsure. "I'll be right back," she stammered, hurrying out. John leaned back in his chair, calm but calculating. This wasn't over. Not yet. 2 hours earlier, John had walked into the bank intending to handle a routine matter. He was dressed in a sharp but understated navy suit, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor as he approached the teller line. The bank was one of the many branches of Carter Financial, a business he had built from the ground up over the past 15 years. But here, in this branch, no one knew his name or his face. He preferred it that way. It gave him a chance to see how his employees treated everyday customers. The teller greeted him with a smile, polite but impersonal. "How can I help you today?" John slid a check across the counter. "I'd like to deposit this." The teller's eyes widened when she saw the amount. Her smile wavered, but she recovered quickly. "One moment, sir. I'll need to get the manager." John didn't think much of it at first. He knew the sum was substantial, $150,000. But he also knew it was perfectly normal for his account. What he didn't anticipate was the whirlwind that followed. Evelyn Harper appeared moments later, striding out of her office with an air of authority. She was in her mid-40s, with sharp features and an impeccable sense of style. She gave John a cursory glance, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Carter," she said, her tone formal. "Yes," John replied, extending his hand. She didn't take it. "Would you mind stepping into my office?" she asked, already turning to lead the way. Inside, the conversation quickly spiraled into a thinly veiled interrogation. Evelyn questioned the origin of the check, his identification, and even his reasons for depositing it in person. The undertones of her skepticism became more apparent with each question. John's patience wore thin, but he answered calmly, refusing to let her rattle him. When she outright refused to process the check, he realized what was happening. She wasn't questioning the check. She was questioning him, and her judgment had nothing to do with the paperwork in front of her. Back in the present, Evelyn returned to the office, her face pale. She had spoken with someone from headquarters, and it was clear she had learned the truth. "Mr. Carter," she began, her voice trembling slightly. I wasn't aware." John held up a hand, cutting her off. "Save it," he said, his tone colder now. "You didn't bother to ask. You saw my skin and decided who I was." "I didn't mean," She stammered, but the words sounded hollow even to her. John stood, towering over her as she sank into her chair. "We'll finish this conversation later," he said, leaving her with a final, piercing look before walking out. The entire bank seemed to hold its breath as he exited her office. Employees exchanged uneasy glances, sensing that something monumental had just happened. As John reached the exit, he turned back. "Call your regional manager," he told the stunned assistant behind the counter. "I'll be back in an hour." The assistant nodded, fumbling with her phone as he stepped into the sunlight outside. John knew this was only the beginning. What happened next would send shockwaves through the entire organization. Evelyn Harper sat in her office, trembling hands gripping the edge of her desk. Her carefully constructed confidence had shattered, leaving her feeling exposed. The words, "I own this bank," echoed in her mind, making her stomach twist. She had assumed John Carter was just another customer trying to pass off a fraudulent check. Instead, she had insulted and dismissed the very man who controlled her career. The phone on her desk rang, jolting her from her thoughts. She stared at it, dreading the conversation on the other end. The caller ID displayed the regional manager's number, confirming that headquarters had been alerted. With a shaky breath, she picked up. "Miss Harper," the voice on the other end said, his tone clipped and professional. "This is Alan Williams. I just spoke with Mr. Carter." "Aye," she began, but Alan cut her off. "I don't want excuses, Evelyn. Do you understand the gravity of what you've done? Mr. Carter is not only the owner of this bank, but one of the most respected businessmen in the state. Your actions today are unacceptable." Evelyn's face burned with humiliation. She opened her mouth to respond, but once again, Alan spoke over her. "Mr. Carter has requested a formal review of your conduct. Until further notice, consider yourself under investigation, and be assured he will expect answers." The line went dead before she could reply. Evelyn placed the receiver back on its cradle, her heart pounding. The assistant outside her office poked her head in, her eyes wide. "Miss Harper, Mr. Carter is back." Evelyn's breath caught. He wasn't giving her time to regroup or prepare. She felt the walls closing in as she rose unsteadily to her feet. When she stepped into the main lobby, the sight of John Carter waiting near the teller line sent a wave of unease through her. John stood calmly, his hands in his pockets, surveying the room like he owned it, which of course he did. Customers whispered, and employees fidgeted, unsure how to react. Evelyn forced a smile, though it felt more like a grimace. "Mr. Carter, welcome back. I'd like to—" "Save it," he said sharply, cutting her off without raising his voice. "We're going to the conference room. Now." She hesitated, glancing around for support, but none of her staff dared meet her gaze. Realizing she had no choice, she nodded and led him down the hall to the largest meeting space in the branch. The room was cold and sterile, with a long table surrounded by leather chairs. John motioned for her to sit, but he remained standing. He paced slowly, his polished shoes clicking against the tile. "Do you know how many branches I've visited in the past year, Miss Harper?" He began, his voice calm but cutting. She shook her head, unable to speak. 32, he continued. "I make it a point to remain anonymous when I visit. I want to see how my employees treat their customers, how they represent the values this bank was built on." Evelyn felt a lump forming in her throat. "Today, I experienced something I hoped I'd never encounter in one of my own branches." He stopped pacing and fixed her with a piercing gaze. "Racism." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. "You didn't ask questions. You didn't verify the check. You made assumptions based solely on how I look," he said, his voice growing firmer. "That is not just unacceptable. It's disgusting." "I didn't mean—" she started, but he raised a hand to silence her. "I don't care what you meant. I care about what you did. You humiliated me. You questioned my integrity without cause. And you undermined the principles of fairness and respect this bank is supposed to uphold." Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Mr. Carter, I'm truly sorry. I made a terrible mistake." John's expression didn't soften. "Sorry isn't enough. You're the manager of this branch. You set the tone for everyone who works here. If you're capable of this kind of behavior, what message does that send to your employees?" The silence in the room was deafening. Evelyn knew she had no defense, no excuse that would satisfy him. "You're suspended effective immediately," John said finally. "Your future with this company will depend on the outcome of the investigation." Evelyn's breath hitched. She had anticipated some form of punishment, but hearing the words felt like a punch to the gut. "I understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. John turned toward the door but paused before leaving. "One more thing," he said, glancing back at her. "You'll issue a public apology to every employee and customer in this branch. I'll have it in writing by tomorrow." Evelyn nodded weakly, unable to look him in the eye. When John stepped out into the lobby, the staff and customers fell silent once again. He addressed the room with a clear, steady voice. "To those of you who witnessed what happened earlier, I want to assure you that this matter is being dealt with. This bank does not tolerate discrimination of any kind." The staff looked relieved, and a few customers nodded in approval. John didn't wait for a response. He left the building, his mind already racing with what needed to happen next. This wasn't just about Evelyn Harper. It was about ensuring that every branch of his bank reflected the values he believed in. As he walked to his car, he knew the fight wasn't over. What had happened today was a symptom of a deeper problem, one that required more than just words to fix. He had a plan forming, but it would take time, and there were bound to be more challenges ahead. For now, though, he took satisfaction in knowing he had made the first move. Evelyn Harper's downfall was only the beginning. John Carter drove in silence, his mind a storm of emotions. His calm demeanor earlier had been a carefully maintained facade, but now, alone in his car, the weight of the day's events pressed on him. The encounter with Evelyn Harper wasn't just about her. It was a stark reminder of the systemic issues that continued to plague institutions, even ones he had built with the promise of fairness. He pulled into the driveway of his suburban home, a modest but elegant property surrounded by neatly trimmed hedges. The house wasn't ostentatious. It reflected John's personality, understated, efficient, and thoughtful. As he stepped inside, his wife, Lisa, greeted him at the door. "You're home early," she said, her smile fading as she took in his expression. "What happened?" John sighed, dropping his briefcase by the door. "You won't believe it," he said, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. "I went to the branch downtown to handle some business. The manager refused to process my check." Lisa's eyes widened. "Refused? Why?" "She thought it was a forgery," he replied, his voice laced with frustration. "Didn't even bother to verify it. Just decided I didn't belong." Lisa's face darkened with anger. "Are you serious? At your own bank?" John nodded, his jaw tightening. "It wasn't just about the check, Lisa. It was about me. About what she thought when she saw me." Lisa placed a comforting hand on his arm. "What did you do?" "I told her the truth," he said. "And I suspended her. But this isn't over. I'm going to make sure every branch understands that this kind of behavior won't be tolerated." Lisa nodded, her expression softening. "You're doing the right thing. But don't let it consume you. Take a moment to breathe." John smiled faintly, grateful for her steady presence. "I'll try." The next day, John arrived at the bank's headquarters early, determined to take swift action. The office was of stark contrast to the branches, sleek, modern, and bustling with activity. As he stepped into the boardroom, several members of his executive team were already waiting. Alan Williams, the regional manager who had called Evelyn, stood at the head of the table. "Morning, everyone," John said, his tone brisk. "We have a lot to discuss." Alan cleared his throat. "I've already spoken with the HR department about the incident. Evelyn Harper has been placed on unpaid suspension, pending a full investigation." "Good," John said, his voice firm. "But this isn't just about her. We need to address the bigger picture. How do we prevent this from happening again?" One of the executives, a woman named Carla Brooks, raised her hand. "We could implement mandatory bias training for all employees, starting with management." John nodded. That's a start. But training alone won't fix this. We need accountability. Regular audits, anonymous feedback from employees and customers, something that ensures people are held to a higher standard. The room murmured in agreement. Another executive, a younger man named Derek Fisher, spoke up. What about public outreach? If word gets out about this incident, it could damage our reputation. We need to show the community that we're committed to change. John considered this, his gaze thoughtful. You're right. We'll release a statement acknowledging what happened and outlining the steps we're taking to address it. But it needs to be more than just words. Actions speak louder. As the meeting continued, the team developed a comprehensive plan to address the issue. By the end, John felt a sense of cautious optimism. They were taking the right steps, but he knew the road ahead would be challenging. Back at the downtown branch, the atmosphere was tense. Employees whispered nervously, unsure of what the future held. Evelyn's absence was palpable, and the staff couldn't help but speculate about the fallout. In the midst of this, one of the tellers, a young woman named Maria, spoke up during a staff meeting. What happened with Ms. Harper was wrong, she said, her voice trembling slightly. But it's not just her. There's a culture here that makes people afraid to speak up. If we're going to change, we need to be honest about that. Her words hung in the air, and the room fell silent. The interim manager, a kind but inexperienced man named James, nodded. You're right, Maria. And I'll make sure headquarters hears about this. Maria's bravery sparked a ripple effect among the staff. Over the next few days, employees began sharing their experiences, shedding light on the subtle but pervasive issues within the branch. Meanwhile, Evelyn Harper sat alone in her upscale apartment, the weight of her suspension pressing down on her. She had spent years climbing the corporate ladder, priding herself on her professionalism and efficiency. But now, all she could think about was how quickly it had all unraveled. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen. It was a message from an old friend, Amanda, who worked at a rival bank. Heard what happened. Call me if you want to talk. Evelyn hesitated before replying. She wasn't ready to discuss the incident, not with Amanda or anyone else. Instead, she opened her laptop and began drafting the apology John had demanded. The words felt hollow as she typed, but she knew she had no choice. To the customers and employees of this branch, her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She still couldn't believe this was happening. But deep down, a small voice nagged at her, forcing her to confront the truth. She had brought this on herself. 2 days later, John returned to the downtown branch, this time accompanied by Alan Williams. They called an all-staff meeting, and the room filled with nervous energy as employees gathered in the break room. John stood at the front, his presence commanding but not intimidating. I want to thank all of you for being here, he began. I know the past few days have been difficult, but I need you to understand something. This isn't just about what happened with Ms. Harper. It's about creating a culture of respect and fairness. That starts with accountability at every level. The staff listened intently as John outlined the new policies and training programs that would be implemented. He encouraged them to speak up if they ever witnessed or experienced discrimination, assuring them that their voices would be heard. As the meeting ended, Maria approached John, her hands trembling slightly. Mr. Carter, she said, thank you for addressing this. It means a lot to all of us. John smiled warmly. Thank you for speaking up, Maria. Change starts with people like you. As he left the branch, John felt a sense of purpose. There was still much work to be done, but for the first time in days, he felt hopeful. Little did he know the events unfolding in the background would soon take an unexpected and dramatic turn. Evelyn Harper sat in the small conference room of the downtown branch, her expression a mix of indignation and dread. 2 human resources representatives sat across from her, their faces impassive. A thick file of complaints, customer feedback, and witness statements sat between them. The suspension was bad enough, but this meeting felt like a formality before something much worse. Evelyn fidgeted with the hem of her blazer as one of the HR reps. A no-nonsense woman named Janet began speaking. Ms. Harper, we've reviewed the events that took place earlier this week, as well as the broader feedback we've received from your team and customers. The evidence points to a consistent pattern of behavior that is not in line with the values of Carter Financial. Evelyn opened her mouth to protest, but Janet held up a hand. Please let me finish. While the incident with Mr. Carter is the most egregious example, it's not the only one. Multiple employees have reported instances where they felt demeaned, dismissed, or outright discriminated against. Several customers have also come forward with complaints about how they were treated under your leadership. I had no idea, Evelyn stammered, her voice barely audible. No one ever said anything to me directly. Janet exchanged a glance with her colleague before continuing. That, Ms. Harper, is part of the problem. As a manager, it's your responsibility to create an environment where people feel safe speaking up. Instead, you've cultivated one of fear and intimidation. Evelyn's pulse quickened. Please, I've worked here for years. I've been loyal, dedicated. This isn't about loyalty, Janet interrupted, her tone firm but not unkind. It's about accountability. Effective immediately, your employment with Carter Financial is terminated. The words hit Evelyn like a punch to the chest. She sat frozen, the gravity of her situation sinking in. The HR reps handed her a folder with the details of her termination and severance package, but the documents felt meaningless in her trembling hands. As Evelyn left the bank for the last time, the whispers and sidelong glances of her former employees felt like knives in her back. For the first time, she truly understood what it meant to be judged and dismissed without a chance to defend herself. John Carter sat in his office at headquarters, reviewing the report on Evelyn's termination. It was a necessary step, but it didn't feel like a victory. One person's dismissal wasn't enough to dismantle the larger issues that had come to light. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Alan Williams entered, his expression serious. "We've got a new problem," he said, handing John a file. John flipped it open, his brow furrowing as he scanned the contents. It was a collection of social media posts and local news articles. The headlines were damning. Racism allegations rock local bank. Bank owner exposes discrimination within his own organization. John sighed, leaning back in his chair. This is getting out of hand. Alan nodded. It's spreading fast. A customer who witnessed the incident posted about it, and it's gone viral. Reporters are already calling for statements. John rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of the situation. Draft a statement, he said finally. I'll review it before we release anything. And schedule a press conference. I want to address this head-on. Alan hesitated. Are you sure? This could get messy. It's already messy, John replied. But hiding isn't going to solve anything. The press conference was scheduled for the following afternoon in a large conference hall downtown. The room was packed with reporters, employees, and community members, all eager to hear what John had to say. As he stepped up to the podium, the room fell silent. The cameras flashed, and the murmurs ceased as he adjusted the microphone. Good afternoon, he began, his voice steady but somber. Thank you all for being here. I want to address the incident that occurred at one of our branches earlier this week. What happened was unacceptable, and I take full responsibility as the owner of Carter Financial. He paused, letting the words sink in. This incident was not an isolated event. It was a symptom of a larger issue, one that exists not just in this bank, but in institutions across the country. Discrimination, whether overt or subtle, has no place in our organization, and I am committed to ensuring that it is eradicated from every level of this company. The room buzzed with murmurs, but John pressed on. We've already taken steps to address this, including the termination of the manager involved. But this is only the beginning. We are implementing mandatory bias training, increasing oversight, and creating anonymous reporting systems to ensure that every voice is heard. A reporter raised her hand. Mr. Carter, how do you respond to critics who say this reflects poorly on your leadership? John met her gaze without flinching. Leadership isn't about perfection. It's about accountability. When something goes wrong, I don't pass the blame. I take action to make it right. Another reporter chimed in. Do you think this will impact customer trust in your bank? I hope it does, John said, his tone firm. I hope this shows our customers that we are willing to confront our failures and work tirelessly to correct them. Trust isn't given, it's earned, and we will earn it. As the press conference concluded, John felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The road ahead would be long, but he was determined to see it through. What John didn't know was that the incident had ignited a broader conversation in the community. Customers, employees, and even rival businesses were now questioning their own practices. The ripple effect was just beginning, and while it brought hope, it also carried unforeseen challenges. Back at the downtown branch, Maria scrolled through her phone, reading comments on a viral post about the press conference. She felt a spark of pride, knowing she had played a small part in pushing for change. But not everyone shared her optimism. In a small cafe across town, Evelyn Harper sat with Amanda, bitterness etched into her features. "I've been made the scapegoat," Evelyn said, her voice tight with resentment. "But I won't go down without a fight." Amanda raised an eyebrow. "What are you planning?" Evelyn's eyes glinted with a dangerous determination. "If they think this is over, they're wrong. I have plenty to say about Carter Financial, and about John Carter himself." As Evelyn plotted her next move, the stage was set for a battle that would test John's resolve and the very foundation of his company. Evelyn Harper stared at her laptop, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. The cursor blinked, almost taunting her. A fresh email draft sat open, addressed to a local investigative journalist she'd met at a networking event years ago. Evelyn's fingers hesitated for only a moment before she began typing, pouring out everything she could think of to paint herself as a victim. She embellished her story, claiming John Carter's actions were part of a personal vendetta. She accused Carter Financial of hypocrisy, alleging that the company had a history of ignoring complaints from minority employees and favoring profits over principles. When she finished, Evelyn read the email aloud to Amanda, who sat across from her sipping a latte. "What do you think?" she asked, leaning back in her chair. Amanda frowned. "You're sure about this? If it backfires, you could make things worse for yourself." Evelyn bristled. "What do I have to lose? My career is ruined. This is my chance to set the record straight." Amanda shrugged. "Your call. Just be ready for whatever comes next." Evelyn hit send without another word. At Carter Financial's headquarters, John Carter sat in his office, going over updates from the PR team. The press conference had been well received, and the company's proactive measures were earning praise from local leaders and activists. But John knew this wasn't the time to relax. Every decision he made was being scrutinized. Alan Williams walked in, his face clouded with concern. "John, we've got a problem." John leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "What now?" Alan placed a printed article on the desk. "Evelyn Harper just gave an interview. It's not good." John scanned the headline. "Ex-bank manager speaks out. I was targeted by Carter Financial." Below it was a picture of Evelyn looking somber and defiant. The article detailed her version of events, laced with accusations of mismanagement and unfair treatment at the company. "She's claiming you targeted her because she raised concerns about the company's practices," Alan explained. "She's framing herself as a whistleblower." John's jaw tightened. "Did she provide any evidence?" Alan shook his head. "None. It's all vague allegations. But it's gaining traction online." John exhaled slowly. "Call the legal team. I want a full review of her claims. And prepare a statement. We're not letting this go unanswered." Later that evening, John returned home, his mind racing. Lisa was waiting for him in the kitchen, a steaming mug of tea in her hands. "You look like you've had another rough day," she said, setting the mug in front of him. John nodded, sitting heavily at the table. "Evelyn's gone public. She's twisting the narrative, making herself out to be a victim." Lisa frowned. "Does she have anything to back it up?" "No, but that doesn't stop people from believing her," John said, rubbing his temples. "This isn't just about me anymore. It's about the bank, our employees, our reputation." Lisa reached across the table, taking his hand. "You've always done the right thing, John. People will see through her lies." John squeezed her hand, grateful for her unwavering support. "I hope you're right." The next morning, Carter Financial released a carefully worded statement, refuting Evelyn's claims and emphasizing the company's commitment to fairness and accountability. The statement included specific examples of the changes implemented since the incident, from mandatory bias training to the creation of an anonymous reporting system. Despite the company's efforts, the public reaction was mixed. Some praised John for his transparency and leadership, while others questioned whether the bank's actions were enough. Evelyn's interview had struck a nerve, sparking debates about workplace discrimination and corporate accountability. As the days passed, the situation grew more complex. A handful of former employees came forward, sharing their own experiences at Carter Financial. While their stories varied, some echoed Evelyn's claims of a toxic work environment. The media latched onto the controversy, turning it into a full-blown scandal. 1 week after Evelyn's interview, Maria, the young teller from the downtown branch, sat in her living room, scrolling through her phone. She had been following the story closely, growing more frustrated with each new headline. She knew Evelyn's claims were exaggerated, if not outright false. Finally, Maria decided she couldn't stay silent. She drafted a post for social media, sharing her own experience with John Carter and the changes he had implemented at the branch. "Working at Carter Financial hasn't always been perfect," she wrote. "But when Mr. Carter visited our branch, he listened to us. He took action. That's more than I can say for Evelyn Harper, who created a culture of fear and favoritism. Don't let one person's bitterness overshadow the truth." Maria hesitated before hitting post, but her resolve strengthened when she thought about the positive changes she had already seen. The post quickly gained traction, with other employees and even customers chiming in to support her perspective. Meanwhile, Evelyn was busy working with her lawyer, preparing a wrongful termination lawsuit against Carter Financial. She believed the lawsuit would force John to settle, giving her both a financial cushion and a sense of vindication. But Evelyn underestimated John's resolve. When the legal team presented him with the news of the lawsuit, his response was immediate. "Fight it," he said firmly. "She's banking on us wanting to avoid bad press, but we're not caving to lies." The legal team began gathering evidence, combing through emails, performance reviews, and witness statements. The more they uncovered, the weaker Evelyn's case became. Still, the lawsuit posed a significant risk to the bank's public image. As tensions escalated, John decided to take a different approach. He called for a town hall meeting, inviting employees, customers, and community leaders to share their concerns and ideas. The event was a bold move, one that carried the risk of more public criticism. But John believed that honesty and openness were the only way forward. The night of the town hall, the venue was packed. John stood at the front of the room, facing a crowd of expectant faces. He took a deep breath and began to speak. "I'm here tonight because I believe in accountability," he said. "Not just for others, but for myself. This bank isn't perfect, and neither am I. But I'm committed to making things better." As he spoke, the room seemed to shift. Skepticism gave way to cautious optimism, and voices began to rise as attendees shared their stories. Some were critical, while others were supportive, but all were heard. When the town hall ended, John felt a sense of hope. The road ahead was still uncertain, but he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't facing it alone. Outside, however, Evelyn watched from a parked car, her expression dark. She wasn't finished. Not yet. Evelyn Harper sat in her dimly lit living room, scrolling through the news on her tablet. Headlines about the town hall filled her screen, most painting it as a success for Carter Financial. Words like transparent, community-driven, and a model for corporate accountability jumped out at her, stinging her pride. She tossed the tablet onto the couch and leaned back, glaring at the ceiling. Amanda, her self-proclaimed confidant throughout the ordeal, entered the room with 2 glasses of wine. "Looks like your ex-boss is winning the PR game," she said, handing Evelyn a glass. Evelyn scowled. "He's just putting on a show. People eat up this humble leader nonsense. But I know the truth." Amanda raised an eyebrow. "Do you?" Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like he's actually trying to fix things. Evelyn shot her a sharp look. Whose side are you on? Amanda sighed, setting her wine down. I'm on your side, but I'm also realistic. You're suing a man with endless resources, a spotless reputation, and now public goodwill on his side. Do you really think you're going to come out of this looking good? Evelyn clenched her jaw. I don't care about looking good. I care about making him pay. Amanda hesitated. And if it all blows up in your face? Evelyn didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed her tablet and opened her email. A new message had come in from her lawyer, marked urgent. At Carter Financial headquarters, John sat in another meeting with his legal team. They had compiled a comprehensive rebuttal to Evelyn's lawsuit, complete with testimonials from current and former employees who were eager to share their experiences under her management. The evidence painted a picture of a leader who had fostered toxicity, not fairness. This is solid, said Sarah, the head of the legal team. But you should know, Evelyn has been in contact with a few disgruntled former employees. They're trying to build a case that there's a deeper culture problem at the bank. John nodded. I expected that. Keep an eye on it, but I'm not backing down. If anything, this lawsuit is an opportunity to show we're serious about accountability. Sarah smiled faintly. You're handling this better than most CEOs would. John shrugged. It's not about handling it. It's about doing what's right. The day of the preliminary court hearing arrived, and the atmosphere was electric. Reporters lined the courthouse steps, shouting questions as John arrived with his team. He remained calm, offering a polite no comment before entering the building. Evelyn, on the other hand, looked tense. Dressed in a sharp black suit, she avoided eye contact with the crowd, keeping her head down as her lawyer guided her inside. The hearing was brief, but the tension in the room was palpable. Both sides presented their initial arguments, with Evelyn's lawyer emphasizing her claim of wrongful termination and discrimination. John's team countered with evidence of her poor management practices and the steps taken to improve the company's culture since her dismissal. When the session ended, the judge scheduled a full hearing for the following month. Evelyn's lawyer approached her as they left the courtroom. We need more leverage, he said. Without something concrete, this case could fall apart. Evelyn nodded, her mind racing. Don't worry. I'll find something. That night, Evelyn dug through her files, searching for anything she could use against John in the bank. She found old emails, performance reviews, and memos, but nothing incriminating. Frustrated, she called Amanda. I need your help, she said. Amanda hesitated. What kind of help? Carter Financial has skeletons in its closet, Evelyn insisted. We just have to dig them up. Amanda sighed. Evelyn, this is starting to sound desperate. Are you in or not? Evelyn snapped. After a long pause, Amanda relented. Fine, but if this backfires, you're on your own. Meanwhile, John was strategizing with Alan and Sarah. They decided to lean into the positive momentum from the town hall, launching a new initiative called Carter Cares, a program aimed at fostering diversity and inclusion across all branches. The initiative gained immediate traction. Community leaders, employees, and even some of the bank's toughest critics praised the program. For John, it was a reminder of why he had started the bank in the first place. But his optimism was tempered by a growing sense of unease. Evelyn's lawsuit was still a looming threat, and the longer it dragged on, the more unpredictable it became. 2 weeks later, Evelyn made her move. She had found an old internal memo from years ago, one that she believed could embarrass the bank. The memo detailed cost-cutting measures that disproportionately affected branches in predominantly minority neighborhoods. While it had been addressed and corrected long before John's tenure as CEO, Evelyn saw it as her ticket to regaining control of the narrative. She leaked the memo to a journalist along with her own commentary, framing it as proof of systemic discrimination within Carter Financial. The article went live within hours, and the backlash was immediate. John read the article in silence, his face unreadable. Alan and Sarah sat across from him, clearly uneasy. This is bad, Alan said. Even though it predates your leadership, the optics are terrible. John set the article down, his expression calm but firm. Then we address it head-on. Schedule another press conference. I'll explain the context and what we've done to make sure it never happens again. Alan nodded, but Sarah frowned. John, this is going to be a hard sell. Evelyn's playing dirty. You might need to consider a counterattack. John shook his head. No, we stick to the truth. Let her dig her hole. We're going to show the public who we really are. As the team left the room, John stared out the window, his mind racing. The battle with Evelyn was far from over, but he was determined to come out on the other side with his integrity intact. What he didn't know was that Evelyn had one more card to play, and it was about to change everything. Evelyn Harper sat in her dimly lit apartment, her face illuminated by the glow of her laptop screen. She stared at a file on her desktop labeled confidential. She had spent days combing through every scrap of data she could find, and now, finally, she believed she had something powerful. It wasn't just about embarrassing John Carter anymore. It was about taking him down. Inside the file was an email thread from years ago, involving an old executive at Carter Financial who had been quietly dismissed after allegations of misconduct surfaced. While the bank had handled the matter internally, the messages revealed how the situation was downplayed to protect the company's image. Evelyn had kept the emails during her time as a manager, thinking they might one day be useful. That day had come. She smiled to herself, feeling a rush of vindication. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about proving she wasn't the only one at fault. If the bank wanted to portray itself as a bastion of fairness and accountability, Evelyn was ready to shatter that illusion. The next morning, the story broke. Leaked emails reveal Carter Financial covered up misconduct at executive level, screamed the headline. The article detailed the contents of the email thread, accusing the bank of hypocrisy and raising questions about its commitment to the very values it claimed to uphold. The public backlash was immediate and intense. Social media exploded with outrage, with calls for John Carter to resign. Protesters gathered outside several branches, demanding transparency and justice. At headquarters, John sat in a tense meeting with his legal and PR teams. Sarah, the head of legal, looked grim. "This changes everything," she said. "The emails predate your leadership, but the public doesn't care. They see your name, and they want answers." John leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight. "What are our options?" Alan spoke up. "We could issue a statement, distancing yourself from the decisions made at the time. Emphasize that the executive responsible was fired and that the bank has implemented new policies since then." John shook his head. "It'll look like we're dodging responsibility. The public needs more than a statement." Sarah hesitated. "There's another option. Full transparency. Release all internal documents related to the incident, even the ones that don't paint us in the best light. It's risky, but it might rebuild some trust." The room fell silent. Everyone looked at John, waiting for his decision. He nodded slowly. "Do it. Prepare the documents for release. If we're going to claim accountability, we need to live it." The next day, Carter Financial held another press conference. The mood was tense as John stepped up to the podium. Facing a sea of cameras and skeptical reporters, he began with a steady voice. "Good afternoon. As many of you have seen, recent reports have brought to light a series of emails regarding an incident at Carter Financial several years ago. While these events occurred before my time as CEO, I take full responsibility for how we address them now." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The emails reveal decisions that were made to protect the bank's reputation at the expense of transparency. That was wrong. And I want to make it clear. Those decisions do not reflect the values we strive for today. John gestured to a packet of documents in front of him. "In the interest of full transparency, we are releasing all internal records related to this matter. You'll see that the executive involved was terminated, and since then, we've implemented policies to ensure incidents like this are handled openly and fairly." The room erupted with questions, but John raised a hand. "I understand the anger and frustration this has caused. All I can do is promise that we will continue to do better, not just in words, but in actions. The press conference was a gamble, but it paid off. While the backlash didn't completely subside, many praised John's willingness to confront the issue head-on. Community leaders commended his transparency, and even some of the bank's critics acknowledged the progress it had made under his leadership. But Evelyn wasn't done. In her apartment, Evelyn watched the press conference with a mixture of frustration and determination. She had hoped the leaked emails would force John to step down, but instead he had turned the narrative back in his favor. Amanda, sitting nearby, raised an eyebrow. "Looks like your plan backfired." Evelyn glared at her. "Not yet. He's not as clean as he wants people to believe." Amanda frowned. "What are you talking about?" Evelyn leaned forward, lowering her voice. "I worked for Carter Financial for years. I saw things that never made it to email. Deals that weren't on the books. If I can find proof, I can end him." Amanda stared at her. "Evelyn, you're playing a dangerous game." "I don't care," Evelyn snapped. "I'm not going to let him win." Meanwhile, Maria, the teller from the downtown branch, watched the fallout unfold with mixed emotions. She admired John's handling of the situation, but she also felt uneasy. The leaked emails and the subsequent uproar reminded her of how fragile trust could be. She decided to write another social media post, this time addressing the public directly. "I've worked at Carter Financial for 3 years. The leaked emails don't reflect the bank I know today. Under John Carter's leadership, we've seen real changes that matter. Don't let the mistakes of the past overshadow the progress we're making." Her post went viral, sparking a wave of similar testimonials from employees across the company. Slowly, the tide began to turn in John's favor. But Evelyn's final move was still to come. Late one night, she made a phone call to an anonymous tip line for a major investigative news outlet. "I have information on Carter Financial," she said, her voice steady. "Something that will blow this whole thing wide open." The reporter on the other end asked, "What kind of information?" Evelyn smiled to herself. Enough to bring John Carter to his knees. What she didn't realize was that her own actions were about to trigger consequences she couldn't control. And this time, she might be the one left standing in the ruins. Evelyn Harper sat in a small diner, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. Across from her was a reporter named Rachel Green, a sharp-eyed journalist with a reputation for uncovering high-profile corporate scandals. Evelyn had reached out to Rachel under the guise of anonymity, but now, as she prepared to divulge everything, she felt a flicker of unease. Rachel leaned forward, her notebook open. "You said you have information about Carter Financial. Something significant. Let's hear it." Evelyn hesitated, glancing around the room to make sure no one was paying attention. Then, in a low voice, she began recounting details of backroom deals she claimed to have witnessed during her time at the bank. She described meetings where clients were prioritized based on wealth or connections rather than merit. She alleged that certain policies were deliberately designed to disadvantage smaller clients, particularly those in underserved communities. Rachel's pen flew across the page. "Do you have proof of any of this?" she asked. "I kept notes," Evelyn replied, pulling out a folder stuffed with handwritten observations, photocopied documents, and personal memos. "And I've got names. People who were there. People who can back me up." Rachel flipped through the folder, her expression unreadable. "If this checks out, it's a big story. But you need to understand something. Once this goes public, it's not just the bank on trial. Your credibility will be scrutinized too." Evelyn nodded, her jaw tightening. "I'm ready for that." At Carter Financial headquarters, John Carter's day had begun like any other, until his assistant burst into his office, her face pale. "Mr. Carter," she said, holding out her tablet, "you need to see this." John took the tablet and frowned as he read the headline. "Whistleblower alleges deep-seated corruption at Carter Financial." The accompanying article detailed Evelyn's claims, painting a damning picture of the bank's inner workings. Though her accusations were vague, they were enough to ignite a firestorm of speculation. Alan Williams entered the office moments later, his expression grim. It's all over the news. We've been fielding calls from reporters and clients since the story broke. John set the tablet down, his jaw tightening. How credible is this? Alan hesitated. That's the thing. Some of what she's saying is plausible, but without hard evidence, it's mostly hearsay. Still, the optics are bad. Get the legal team on it, John said firmly. I want a thorough review of her claims, and reach out to our major clients. Reassure them that we're taking this seriously. Across the city, Maria scrolled through her phone during her lunch break, reading the latest articles about the growing scandal. She sighed, frustrated by the endless cycle of accusations and counterclaims. As a teller, she had seen firsthand the changes John had implemented, but now it felt like those efforts were being overshadowed by Evelyn's narrative. Determined to do something, Maria drafted a letter to the editor of a local newspaper. In it, she shared her experience working under John's leadership and highlighted the positive steps the bank had taken in recent years. I don't know what happened in the past, she wrote, but I know what's happening now. John Carter has brought transparency, fairness, and progress to this company. Don't let one person's bitterness erase that. Maria's letter was published within days, sparking a wave of similar testimonials from employees and clients. For every negative article about Carter Financial, there was now a counterpoint, stories of integrity, change, and hope. Meanwhile, Rachel Green was hard at work verifying Evelyn's claims. She reached out to several of the individuals named in Evelyn's notes, but most either denied the allegations or refused to comment. Rachel's investigation began to hit roadblocks, and cracks started to appear in Evelyn's story. One former employee who had worked closely with Evelyn told Rachel, "She's not a reliable source. She always had a chip on her shoulder, and she's known for exaggerating. Be careful about trusting her." Rachel's editor grew impatient. "If we can't substantiate this, we can't publish anything more," he warned. "Keep digging, but we need hard evidence." Evelyn, sensing that her credibility was slipping, grew desperate. She began reaching out to anyone she thought might back her up, but her frantic calls and emails only raised more suspicions. At the same time, Carter Financial's internal investigation uncovered something Evelyn hadn't anticipated. In her final months at the bank, she had made unauthorized changes to customer accounts, likely to inflate her performance metrics. The legal team compiled a report detailing her actions and presented it to John. "This gives us leverage," Sarah, the head of legal, said. "If she continues to make baseless accusations, we can counter with this. It's enough to discredit her entirely." John frowned, the report in his hands. "I don't want to use this unless we have to. Let her bury herself with her lies. If we're going to fight this, we're doing it the right way." As the weeks passed, Evelyn's credibility eroded further. Rachel Green, unwilling to publish a follow-up without solid evidence, quietly dropped the story. Public opinion began to shift again, with many seeing Evelyn's accusations as a desperate attempt to salvage her reputation. Evelyn, however, refused to admit defeat. Late one night, she logged onto an anonymous forum, hoping to stir up support by leaking snippets of unverified information. But the move backfired spectacularly. Within hours, internet sleuths traced the posts back to her, exposing her as the source. The revelation only deepened the public's distrust of her claims. John Carter watched the fallout with a mix of relief and exhaustion. The battle had taken its toll on him and the company, but he was proud of how they had handled it, with transparency and integrity. Still, he knew the fight wasn't over. Rebuilding trust would take time, and Evelyn's vendetta had left scars that wouldn't heal overnight. One morning, as he reviewed the latest updates with Alan, John's assistant walked in with a letter. "This just arrived," she said, handing it to him. John opened the envelope and read the neatly typed message. It was from Evelyn offering to drop her lawsuit in exchange for a settlement. She claimed she wanted to move on, but John could read between the lines. She was running out of options. He set the letter down and looked at Alan. "Draft a response," he said. "We're not settling. Not now. Not ever." The stage was set for the final showdown. Evelyn's desperation was growing, but John was determined to see this battle through to the end, on his terms. Evelyn Harper paced her apartment, clutching her phone as her lawyer explained the latest developments in her case. His voice was calm, measured, but the underlying message was clear. Her lawsuit was crumbling. "We're losing ground," he said bluntly. "The evidence they've compiled against you, the account alterations, the internal complaints about your management, it's damning. If this goes to court, we're looking at the possibility of counterclaims." Evelyn stopped pacing, her heart pounding. "So you're saying I should just give up?" Her lawyer hesitated. "I'm saying you need to think carefully about your next move. Dropping the lawsuit might be your best option." Evelyn gritted her teeth. "If I back down now, I lose everything." "That might already be the case," her lawyer replied. "But if you persist, it could get worse." Evelyn ended the call without responding, throwing her phone onto the couch. She wasn't ready to admit defeat, but the walls were closing in. The lawsuit, the leaks, the media, it was all unraveling faster than she could control. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. She opened it to find Amanda standing there, arms crossed. "You look awful," Amanda said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Thanks for the pep talk," Evelyn muttered, collapsing onto the couch. Amanda sat across from her, her expression serious. "I saw the latest article. You're losing, Evelyn, and now people are starting to dig into your past. If you don't end this now, you might never recover." Evelyn shook her head. "I can't let him win." "This isn't about him anymore," Amanda said, her tone sharp. "It's about you. You've burned bridges, damaged your reputation, and dragged yourself into a legal mess you can't win. How much more are you willing to lose?" Evelyn didn't answer. She stared at the floor, the weight of Amanda's words sinking in. At Carter Financial, John Carter sat in a quiet meeting room, reviewing the latest updates with Sarah and Alan. The lawsuit was effectively dead, and public opinion was swinging back in their favor, but John remained cautious. "She's desperate," Sarah said. "We've backed her into a corner. That's when people like her are the most dangerous." John nodded. "What's our exposure if she keeps pushing?" "Minimal," Sarah replied. "The evidence against her is overwhelming. But if she leaks anything else, even unverified, it could reignite the controversy." Alan leaned forward. "We could preempt her. Go public with what we've uncovered about her misconduct." John shook his head. "No, we're not stooping to her level. Let her make the next move. If she wants to continue this fight, she'll only destroy herself." Meanwhile, Evelyn was drafting an open letter to the media, desperate to reclaim control of the narrative. She framed herself as a whistleblower, a victim of systemic issues within Carter Financial. She claimed her dismissal was a calculated attempt to silence her, ignoring the mounting evidence against her. But as she stared at the screen, doubts crept in. The stories she had spun, the half-truths she had stretched, they no longer felt like weapons. They felt like weights pulling her deeper into the quicksand. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before she slammed the laptop shut. For the first time, Evelyn wondered if Amanda was right. Maybe it was time to stop fighting. The next day, Evelyn's lawyer informed Carter Financial that she was withdrawing her lawsuit. The announcement came with no fanfare, no dramatic statement, just a single line of legal text acknowledging her decision. When the news reached John, he felt a wave of relief, but also a twinge of sadness. This entire ordeal could have been avoided if Evelyn had taken accountability from the start. Instead, she had let her bitterness consume her. "She's out," Alan said as they reviewed the paperwork. "But the damage she's done will take time to repair." John nodded. "We'll repair it, one step at a time." Evelyn, now jobless and estranged from her former colleagues, spent her days in isolation. The media had moved on, and her once bold accusations had faded into the background noise of the news cycle. Amanda visited occasionally, offering words of encouragement, but their friendship was strained. One evening, Evelyn received a package in the mail. It was from Carter Financial. Inside was a letter from John Carter himself. "Dear Evelyn, I hope this letter finds you well. While our paths have diverged, I want you to know that I harbor no ill will toward you. The events of the past months have been challenging for all involved, but I believe they have also been an opportunity for growth and reflection. If you ever wish to discuss the future or seek reconciliation, my door is open. Best regards, John Carter. Evelyn stared at the letter, her emotions a jumble of anger, shame, and something she couldn't quite identify. She folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, unsure if she would ever respond. At Carter Financial, the rebuilding process was well underway. The Carter Cares initiative had expanded, and John continued to host community forums, listening to feedback and implementing changes. One day, as he walked through the lobby of the downtown branch, Maria approached him with a smile. "Mr. Carter, I just wanted to say thank you for everything." John smiled back. "It's people like you, Maria, who make this company what it is. Thank you for standing by us." As he left the branch, John felt a renewed sense of purpose. The storm had passed, but the lessons it had brought would shape the bank and his leadership for years to come. Evelyn's shadow lingered, but it no longer defined him. The future was his to build, and he intended to do so with integrity, transparency, and hope. Evelyn Harper sat in the park near her apartment, watching as families picnicked and children played on the swings. The crisp autumn air carried the faint scent of leaves and earth, but Evelyn hardly noticed. John Carter's letter was still on her mind. She had reread it countless times, trying to decipher his intentions. Was it genuine? A calculated move? Or simply a way to twist the knife one last time? She thought about the life she had once imagined for herself, success, respect, and a legacy to be proud of. Now, all she had was an empty apartment and a dwindling bank account. The fallout from her actions had left her ostracized, but what stung the most was the realization that her bitterness had driven her to ruin. Evelyn sighed and pulled her phone from her bag. For weeks, she had avoided social media, unwilling to face the barrage of criticism and ridicule. But today, curiosity got the better of her. She scrolled through the posts about Carter Financial, expecting to find lingering resentment or skepticism. Instead, she was surprised by the tone of the conversation. Employees praised the new initiatives. Customers shared stories of improved service. Even some critics acknowledged that the bank was making real strides under John's leadership. Evelyn's heart sank. The narrative she had fought so hard to control had slipped through her fingers. Her thoughts were interrupted by a notification. It was an email from an old colleague, someone she hadn't spoken to in years. The subject line read, "A second chance?" Evelyn opened it hesitantly. "Hi, Evelyn. I heard about everything that's happened, and I wanted to reach out. I know things didn't end well for you at Carter Financial, but I believe everyone deserves a chance to rebuild. If you're open to it, I'd love to connect and discuss some opportunities I've come across. Best, Mark." Evelyn stared at the screen, her emotions swirling. A part of her wanted to dismiss the email, to wallow in the belief that rebuilding was impossible. But another part of her, the part that still clung to hope, wanted to reply. She took a deep breath and began typing. At Carter Financial, John Carter was finalizing plans for the next phase of the Carter Cares initiative. The program had been a resounding success, but John knew there was more work to be done. He wanted to ensure that the bank not only repaired its reputation, but also became a model for inclusivity and fairness. Alan Williams entered the office, a stack of reports in hand. "The numbers are looking good," he said. "Customer satisfaction is up 18%, and employee retention has improved significantly." "That's good to hear," John replied, "but let's not get complacent. Schedule another round of employee town halls. I want to keep the momentum going." Alan nodded. "Already in the works." As Alan turned to leave, John's phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from an employee in one of the rural branches. The subject line read, "Thank you for listening." John opened the email and smiled as he read the heartfelt message. The employee described how the bank's new policies had made her feel valued for the first time in years. It was moments like this that reminded John why he had started Carter Financial in the first place. Meanwhile, Maria had taken on a new role as a branch liaison, traveling between locations to gather feedback and share best practices. Her work brought her to the downtown branch frequently, where she was now a well-known and respected figure. One afternoon, as she prepared for a meeting, she noticed a familiar face walking into the lobby. Evelyn Harper stood near the entrance, looking hesitant and out of place. She clutched a folder to her chest, her gaze darting around as if she expected someone to throw her out. Maria approached her cautiously. "Miss Harper." Evelyn turned, startled. "Maria, I wasn't expecting to see you here." Maria folded her arms. "What are you doing here?" Evelyn hesitated before answering. "I came to drop this off for Mr. Carter." She held up the folder. "It's a letter, and some ideas for improving the bank's outreach efforts. I know I don't have any right to offer advice, but I thought it might help." Maria's expression softened, though she remained wary. "I'll make sure he gets it." "Thank you," Evelyn said, her voice barely above a whisper. She turned to leave but paused. "Maria, I'm sorry for everything." Maria nodded, unsure what to say. She watched as Evelyn walked out the door, her figure small against the bustling city street. Later that day, Maria delivered the folder to John's office. "You're not going to believe who stopped by," she said, handing it to him. John opened the folder and found Evelyn's letter inside. It was concise, thoughtful, and unexpectedly humble. She acknowledged her mistakes and expressed genuine remorse, offering suggestions for community outreach programs and strategies for supporting underserved customers. John leaned back in his chair, rereading the letter. He didn't know if Evelyn's intentions were entirely pure, but the sincerity in her words was hard to ignore. "What do you think?" Maria asked. John considered the question carefully. "I think everyone deserves a chance to make things right." In the weeks that followed, Evelyn began to piece her life back together. She accepted Mark's offer to explore new opportunities, working on projects that aligned with her skills and values. Though her reputation was still tarnished, she found solace in small victories: an encouraging email, a productive meeting, a chance to contribute meaningfully. At Carter Financial, John quietly implemented some of Evelyn's suggestions, finding value in her insights despite their tumultuous history. He didn't announce the changes publicly, but those close to him knew it was his way of offering a second chance. For both John and Evelyn, the ordeal had been a crucible, forging new perspectives and hard-earned lessons. While their paths might never cross again, the ripple effects of their choices would continue to shape their futures and the world around them in ways neither could fully anticipate. Evelyn Harper's world was far quieter now. The storm she had created and the whirlwind that had followed had finally settled into an uneasy calm. She spent her mornings working remotely for a small nonprofit that focused on financial literacy in underserved communities, a role she had taken at Mark's recommendation. The work wasn't glamorous and the pay was modest, but it gave her something she hadn't felt in years: purpose. Evelyn often thought about Carter Financial and John Carter. She wondered if her letter had made any difference or if it had been discarded without a second glance. Though she told herself it didn't matter, the question lingered in her mind. One afternoon, as she was reviewing a proposal for a new community workshop, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from John Carter. At Carter Financial, John sat in his office, drafting a response to Evelyn's letter. Though he had quietly implemented some of her ideas, he hadn't initially planned to reach out. But as the weeks passed, he found himself reflecting on the value of forgiveness, not just as a personal principle, but as a tool for growth. "Dear Evelyn, thank you for your letter. I appreciate the thought and effort you put into it, as well as your willingness to acknowledge the past. I've taken some of your suggestions to heart, and I want you to know they're already making a difference. I believe in second chances, and I hope you're finding your own path forward. Should you ever wish to collaborate on initiatives that align with your current work, my team and I would be open to discussing opportunities. Best regards, John Carter." He hit send, unsure if he would ever hear back. Evelyn read the email twice, her heart pounding. The offer to collaborate wasn't something she had expected. It wasn't a reconciliation, but it was something, an acknowledgement that her ideas still had value. She hesitated before replying. Her pride urged her to decline, but another part of her, the part that wanted to build something meaningful from the wreckage, urged her to accept. Dear Mr. Carter, thank you for your response and for considering my suggestions. I'm glad to hear they've been helpful. I would welcome the opportunity to collaborate, particularly in areas that serve marginalized communities. Please let me know how I can contribute. Sincerely, Evelyn Harper. 2 weeks later, Evelyn found herself sitting in a conference room at Carter Financial headquarters. The room was familiar yet strange, a reminder of both her past mistakes and the possibility of redemption. John entered, his demeanor calm and professional, but there was a warmth in his tone that put Evelyn at ease. Thank you for coming, he said, gesturing for her to sit. We've been developing a new initiative to expand financial literacy programs in underserved areas, and I think your experience could be valuable. Evelyn nodded, grateful for the chance. I'd like to help in any way I can. As they discussed ideas, Evelyn felt a spark of energy she hadn't experienced in years. The conversation flowed naturally, and for the first time she saw John not as an adversary, but as someone who genuinely cared about the work they were doing. The collaboration was cautious at first, but it quickly proved fruitful. Evelyn worked with John's team to design workshops, outreach campaigns, and mentorship programs. Though her role was unofficial, her input was respected, and she began to regain some of the confidence she had lost. For John, the partnership was a calculated risk, but one he believed in. He saw potential in Evelyn not just in her ideas, but in her willingness to change. By bringing her into the fold, he hoped to demonstrate that growth and accountability could coexist. Months passed, and the Carter Cares initiative reached new heights. Branches across the country implemented programs inspired by Evelyn's work, and the bank received widespread recognition for its efforts. Evelyn remained behind the scenes, content to contribute without fanfare. One day, as she reviewed feedback from a recent workshop, Maria called her. I heard about what you've been working on, Maria said, her tone light but sincere. I just wanted to say, I'm glad you found a way to move forward. Evelyn smiled, her heart lifting. Thank you, Maria. That means a lot. The journey wasn't without its challenges. Evelyn still faced skepticism from those who remembered the scandal, and she had to work twice as hard to prove herself. But with each success, she felt a little closer to the person she wanted to become. For John, the experience reaffirmed his belief in the power of second chances. By offering Evelyn an opportunity to contribute, he had not only helped her rebuild, but had also strengthened the bank's mission. On a crisp spring morning, John and Evelyn stood side by side at a community event, watching as families participated in a financial literacy fair. Children laughed as they played games designed to teach budgeting skills, while adults attended workshops on saving and investing. This is what it's all about, John said, his voice filled with quiet pride. Evelyn nodded, a small smile on her lips. It feels good to be part of something that matters. As they stood there, surrounded by the buzz of the community they were working to uplift, it was clear that the past, while never forgotten, no longer defined them. Together, they had turned a story of conflict into one of growth, resilience, and hope for the future. The room was filled with applause as John Carter stepped up to the podium. The event marked the one-year anniversary of the Carter Cares initiative, and the packed hall was a testament to its success. Employees, community leaders, and even former critics had gathered to celebrate the program's milestones. Hundreds of workshops held, thousands of lives impacted, and a renewed trust in Carter Financial. John adjusted the microphone, his steady gaze sweeping over the audience. Thank you all for being here today. When we started this journey, our goal wasn't just to rebuild trust, but to create something lasting, something that would serve as a beacon for the values we stand for: fairness, accountability, and opportunity. The audience listened intently as John shared stories of individuals who had benefited from the initiative. There was the single mother who had started her own business after attending a workshop, the teenager who had opened her first savings account, and the retired teacher who had finally achieved financial independence. These stories remind us of what's possible when we come together with a shared purpose, John continued. But none of this would have been possible without the dedication of the people in this room. I want to thank each of you for your commitment to making a difference. The applause was thunderous, but as John stepped back from the podium, he felt a different kind of satisfaction, a quiet pride in knowing the work was making a tangible impact. Evelyn Harper watched from the back of the room, her arms crossed and a faint smile on her face. She hadn't planned to attend the event, but an invitation had arrived in her inbox a week earlier, and curiosity had gotten the better of her. The transformation of Carter Financial was undeniable, and she felt a mix of pride and humility knowing she had played a small role in it. For the first time in a long time, Evelyn felt like she was part of something meaningful. As the event concluded, John spotted her lingering near the exit. He approached, his expression warm but curious. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. Evelyn shrugged. "I wasn't sure either, but I'm glad I did. You've built something remarkable here." John nodded. "We all have, and that includes you." Evelyn hesitated, then extended her hand. "Thank you, John, for giving me a second chance." He shook her hand firmly. Everyone deserves one. The following months saw Evelyn fully reintegrated into her new role. Though she remained on the periphery of Carter Financial's operations, her work with the Carter Cares initiative flourished. She focused on outreach in communities that had historically been underserved, using her own experiences as a guide. Meanwhile, John continued to lead with integrity, using the lessons of the past as a foundation for the future. The bank's reputation had not only recovered, but had reached new heights, serving as a model for how corporations could embrace accountability and change. One evening, as Evelyn closed her laptop after a long day, she received a text from Maria. It was a photo from a workshop they had co-hosted earlier that week. In the picture, children and parents were smiling, holding up certificates of completion. "We're making a difference," Maria had written. "This is what it's all about." Evelyn stared at the photo for a long moment, a sense of fulfillment washing over her. For the first time in years, she felt at peace, not because she had won, but because she had chosen to grow. John Carter sat in his office late that same night, reviewing plans for the next phase of the Carter Cares initiative. A knock at the door broke his concentration, and Alan Williams stepped in. "You're still here?" Alan asked with a grin. "You know we're ahead of schedule for once, right?" John chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Just making sure everything's in place." Alan nodded. "Well, I hope you take a moment to celebrate. You've turned a crisis into something extraordinary." John's gaze drifted to the framed photos on his desk, snapshots from workshops, community events, and employee gatherings. "It wasn't just me," he said. "It was all of us." The journey of Carter Financial was far from over, but the path ahead was brighter than ever. For John, Evelyn, Maria, and everyone involved, the lessons of the past had become the foundation of a future built on trust, compassion, and shared purpose. And in that, they found not just redemption, but a chance to create something truly lasting. A legacy defined not by mistakes, but by the courage to rise above them.